hit record, and we're going to get going. Welcome to the third of our webinars today for the Sober Weekender on Saturday. This evening, I'm joined by our colleagues Jessie and Anya, who work for the Club Soda Guide, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. Do you guys want to introduce yourselves so people know who you are?
Yeah, sure. I'm Jessie. I run the Club Soda Guide, which is our online website of alcohol-free or low, no alcohol drinks and the venues that stock them across the country. And I've been working with Club Soda for just over a year now.
Brilliant.
I'm Anya. I help Jessie on the guide, and I also write various bits of content for Club Soda about different drinks and brands.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember how long I've been working with Club Soda.
Feels like a while, and also the other thing, Anya, that's worth saying on is that you collaborated with me in creating the Club Soda book, How to Be a Mindful Drinker.
Yes, I did. That was a good time.
That was a good time. Anya did an amazing job interviewing people for case studies for the book, for both the UK and US edition, and writing the drink section. And that's really largely what we're here to talk about. So one of the things which we get asked about a lot in Club Soda is what to drink if you're not drinking. And I know that for those of you who came to the webinar this afternoon, Laura had a bit of a chat about 0.5% and what that means, and it's probably worth just rehearsing that to put all of that into context so we know what we're talking about. But basically, this is the summary of all of the complexity around it. 0.5% ABV means that a drink contains 0.5% alcohol by volume. That means that it's 99.5% water and other ingredients. And across a lot of the world, anything which is 0.5% or below gets labelled as alcohol-free. And in fact, there are lots of drinks which also contain alcohol, but otherwise you'd never know. So things like ripe banana smoothies and freshly squeezed orange juice and all sorts of things contain alcohol. Bread contains alcohol. Ripe bananas contain alcohol. Soy sauce, it's a natural byproduct of fermentation, and the amount that's in a drink, which is 0.5% ABV below, is a trace. So countless studies have shown that it can't get you drunk, doesn't affect your driving ability, and is safe if you're pregnant. And you don't need an alcohol license to sell it. Anyway, that's the summary of why we, within Club Soda, regard everything that's 0.5% or below as alcohol-free. That's kind of set that bit of landscape. Just by way of kind of a bit of housekeeping, I guess, if you've got any comments or questions, if you're watching this, and any thoughts about drinks and what to drink, do you pop them in the chat? I'll be keeping an eye on that, and we'll answer them as we're going along. But yeah, what I thought we'd do is, because for people who are maybe doing the Sober Weekender this weekend, this may be an opportunity to try some new things. What I thought we might do is kind of start with the drinks that people might be drinking right now, and then look at what are the good alternatives and what can you drink instead. So, because somebody's just asked this question, I'm going to start with a really hard one, which is, what about red wine? Let's talk about red wine alternatives. You guys?
Oh, good. Okay. Red wine is, of all the wines, the trickiest to get right, and there's quite a few reasons. So when you're making these products, you're going to have to generally make a full strength wine and then remove the alcohol from it. And there are quite a few different ways to do that, but most of them do involve stripping out flavour or damaging flavour to some extent. So you generally notice, I think, more with red wines than whites and pink and fizz, sort of imbalances in flavour, and that the tannin can still be quite heavy. And you really notice that when there's not the alcohol there to kind of balance that out. So it is really hard to find a good red wine.
I think something we've noticed across wines in general is that often when, unlike say other categories of drinks, people are finding new methods which don't involve necessarily, say, using grapes, and kind of getting the flavors that you'd get from an alcoholic wine, but having it in something that's a slightly different drink. So obviously you've got, you know, kind of kombuchas mimicking some of those flavors of sparkling wines and whites. And for reds, there's a brand called Nine Elms who make a really nice, it's not a red wine, but it has that full flavor that you'd expect, but they make it using botanicals instead. So I think that's something that we've kind of seen, people trying to do alcohol-free wines kind of coming up parallel with it, the category, rather than just making full-strength wines and then kind of boiling off the alcohol.
Yeah.
I think the other thing just about red wine particularly is that it's one of those drinks where, as Anya says, because so much of the drink is wrapped up in the alcohol, and with that not there, you do get a very different flavour profile. And I agree with what Jessie said. I think Nine Elms is great. Someone just commented about Adnams 0.5%. I think it's Cabernet Sauvignon. I think it's really drinkable. But yeah, but red wine is difficult, and I think it's one of those things where it's worth thinking about, not just about the drink that you're replacing, but the occasion that you are drinking it in and the kind of sensation you want. And I wondered whether you guys have got any kind of suggestions, not for just a like-for-like replacement with red wine. If somebody is a red wine drinker, are there other types of drinks that they could try which are going to appeal to their palate? Jessie, you mentioned kombucha, and I wonder whether is that an answer for some people?
Yeah, well, I think some of the richer kombuchas might add that complexity of flavour. Generally, kombuchas probably more closely mimic whites and sparklings because they tend to kind of have that lighter colour and that lighter flavour on your palate, and they often, you know, are slightly effervescent as well. But yeah, definitely the kombuchas and shrubs, which can kind of have some more funky, interesting flavors, can kind of offer that complexity, which I think red wine drinkers often enjoy.
Yeah. The guys from Shrub have recently started making a really interesting alternative to red wine. I think it's called Sarab. And it's, if you've ever had a natural wine, so something that's unfiltered, and maybe you would notice the acidity a little bit more, I think they've captured that really well with that particular product. I'm not sure where they're at with distributing it at the moment, because I know before Christmas it all went to France and I couldn't get any here. But it's worth checking that out as well. It's got quite a lot of really nice kind of botanical flavours, but still that richness and a bit of acidity as well.
Mm-hmm. And it is worth saying as well, isn't it, that with that whole category of shrubs, sorry, the thing which just leapt into my mind is that a trick that we sometimes suggest if you've got a slightly disappointing alcohol-free red wine from the supermarket, and to be really frank, and I hope there's no supermarket buyers listening, the alcohol-free reds generally in supermarkets are pretty disappointing. But actually you can add some complexity by adding a couple of drops of red wine vinegar into it as an option.
Cheeky. It's also worth considering chilling them as well. Like there are some red wines that suit being chilled anyway. And yeah, experiment with temperatures as well, and you might find that can kind of elevate it a bit more.
Yeah. Sorry, Annie, we got a question, which was the drink that you mentioned. Is it made by Shrub?
So it's made by Shrub, but I think they've put it under a different company.
It's called Sharab. I'll put the name in the chat.
Thank you, Jessie.
Thanks, Jessie. Brilliant. Cool. Can I ask a different question? This is maybe an easier question, and one which I think plays to Jessie's strengths, which is, let's talk about beer. So I am drinking this evening Heineken 0.0. I think this is what Anya would describe as an unchallenging lager. But Anya, which makes me laugh, but Heineken and actually some of the big brewers have put really a lot of work into creating alcohol-free alternatives for their main brands. So maybe could we start at kind of that end of the beer market and then work our way towards craft beers and just kind of talk about some of the range of what's available. And particularly what I'm thinking about is the people who are kind of new to this space, you might have encountered and been slightly disappointed by Beck's Blue in the past. And I wonder if you can talk about, you know, at the kind of bottled lager end, what there is available, but then kind of across the whole range, what kind of stuff that people might hunt out and find.
Yeah, so most mainstream lager brands in particular do now have an alcohol-free alternative. The kind of things we've seen come to market over the past year include Peroni bringing out an alcohol-free, Birra Moretti brought out an alcohol-free, Stella Artois have also just brought out an alcohol-free. I personally really think Heineken Zero is very, very good. I think it's almost indistinguishable from alcoholic Heineken. The question then being is whether you think alcoholic Heineken is any good. But, you know, for most of these brands, if you have a favourite alcoholic macro lager, you know, something you're going to come across in the pub all the time, the chances are, if you seek it out, you will be able to find an alcohol-free equivalent. And also, they tend to have quite good supermarket coverage. So you're more likely to find those kind of brands in your Sainsbury's or your Tesco.
A quick question on that, Jesse. Somebody just asked in the comments, which is about alcohol-free beer on draft. Obviously, pubs are closed right now, so this is kind of a bit of a sore point. But there are some, right? If you hunt them out. Yeah.
So the person in the chat mentioned Heineken. Yeah, they do their zero on draft, which again, I think, you know, so much of when it comes to thinking about rituals of drinking, you want to feel like you're having a, you know, cold pint in your hand, and having those, you know, drinks on draft really takes the alcohol-free taste to the next level, because it allows you to recreate that experience for yourself more so than just having something out of a bottle. Heineken are the main macro brands that are really pushing forward on that. We've seen a lot more crafty brands move into that space. So Brooklyn Brewery, who do a lager, their special effects alcohol-free started to pop up in draft. And then you've got some English craft breweries like Lucky Saint and Big Drop, Thornbridge, all of whom have started dotting out in their various localities on draft as well. But unfortunately, it is still a lot harder to get hold of in your local than we would like.
Mm-hmm. But let's talk a little bit about craft beer and the range of stuff that's available. And this is a huge subject, and I realise that we could talk about craft beer for hours. Sorry, Jesse, I realise that you could talk about craft beer for hours. But yeah, just give us a sense of what's around and maybe what's good. You know, if people are kind of looking for specialist things, what can they find?
Anya, do you want to?
I mean, I've got one here that I picked up a couple of days ago. So it's Maiselweiss. So it's not, I'm going to say it's not craft. It's still pretty big. But this is a wheat beer. With wheat beers, it's great because they tend to retain a good, like, fluffy head on them, and they tend to have a bit more body to them because of the yeast that's used in making them. So I generally find with the wheat beers, it's quite a good likeness in terms of texture. I mean, Jessie, what are your favourites at the moment?
I think Lucky Saint is really one of my favourites. They are a lager, and they've been very heavily influenced by German brewing techniques when it comes to alcohol-free drinks. Germany is really, you know, been at the forefront of alcohol-free beer for a long time. And so the kind of stuff you might have come across is like Erdinger's alcohol-free, and then obviously, like the wheat beers like Anya's often pop up a lot. And so Lucky Saint kind of spent some time studying those methods and took that technique and brought it back here. And they just created a really crisp Pilsner that is very, very good, again, especially on draft. In terms of more like pale ales and IPAs, Big Drop are very good as well. They've just recently had a rebrand, but they have a Citra IPA and a pale ale, both of which are very, very tasty. I also like, if you're looking for some more maybe fruity sours, the Mikkeller range, you can't ever really go wrong with. They're constantly putting out
Blueberry Limbo.
The Limbo series. Yeah, and they've got their Weird Weather, which is their hazy IPA, which is quite fun as well, as you know, a style that you don't really often see that often replicated in alcohol free.
Yeah, that was quite a bold move. I enjoyed that.
Yeah. But the most exciting thing I think at the moment is that, you know, lots of craft breweries in Britain who normally brew full strength beer are now, you know, moving into having either alcohol free or sub 3% beers. You know, we've really seen a rise recently in the micro IPA stuff that's kind of being brewed at 2.5 to 2.8%, which is a really great moderation option as well. And then also breweries just going with the whole hog and trying out the 0.5% stuff. You know, there's people like Thornbridge have been doing it for a while, but like Brewdog have also been, you know, going strong for a while, but they're adding more to their range. And then, you know, places trying out for the first time, like Tiny Rebel and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favourites. Oh, sorry. One of my favourites has been Ilkley, who are like, I used to work with them. They're a really small traditional brewery in Ilkley, and their kind of flagship beer is called Mary Jane, and it's 3.5% pale, and they've started doing an alcohol-free version of that called Virgin Mary, and that's 0.5. And I think that's a brilliant beer, and quite a lot of places have started getting it in around me, which is really nice.
Yeah. Can I throw in a couple of beer-related questions? So let's do the first one, which is about gluten-free, alcohol-free beers. So I'm aware that, I've never seen the overlap between these two things, but I'm aware that as I walk through Tesco's, there is the gluten-free section and it has some beers in it. And then you come to the alcohol-free section and it's got the alcohol-free beers. Is there anything that overlaps those two categories for anyone who is celiac or needing to avoid gluten? And also alcohol-free, is anyone making anything that fills that gap?
So I believe Drop Bear beers are gluten free. Off the top of my head, I don't.
Binary Botanical, I think that they might be gluten free also, but I would need to check that. If you're celiac, don't run out and buy it and chug it on that recommendation. But they theirs is kind of like quite an interesting hybrid between beer and wine. So I think they use like hop leaves, and it's sparkling, and it sits somewhere between being like a kind of prosecco and a beer, and it's really tasty. And I think that is gluten free. I think.
Yeah. Okay. I think Jessie may be googling on the side, but let's continue the conversation.
It is gluten free.
Nailed it.
Excellent. So also shout out to Drop Bear Beer, who are based in Wales, which to me. Man braf, dwi'n meddwl. It's nice, I think. So anyway, fabulous. Okay, so our second beer question, and this is a manufacturing, how do you make it question, which is, how do you make an alcohol-free beer? Are people making a full-strength beer and then stripping out the alcohol, or are they brewing low alcohol, or how does it happen? What's going on?
We can actually answer this. So there's quite a few different methods. I mean, Jessie, do you jump in at any point? There's quite a few different methods. So there's one method where you actually don't brew beer at all and you try and replicate it. Always makes you think of when you're a kid and you make potions, but you mix together ingredients to try and recreate the flavors of beer. So there's never any fermentation. That's called reverse engineering. I would say that you get some tasty drinks from it, but whether I would drink that and think of beer when I drink it, I'm not sure.
So this is something that really upsets beer snobs, right? I'm looking at Jessie. It's not proper beer, is it?
Not in the traditional sense of the word, no, and it doesn't always taste like that. It can be a really interesting option, and it throws up some interesting flavors, and definitely sometimes for like cider drinkers who are looking for a bit more of a like sweeter, funkier taste, I think that method can actually throw up some drinks that suit that. They just don't always necessarily go well with a beer palate.
Yeah, I think that's a fair, yeah.
Okay, let's move on from that to talk about other ways of making alcohol-free beer.
You can brew beer using, I think they call it like a lazy yeast. So it's a yeast that doesn't particularly do much. So there is still a fermentation, but you'll only actually brew to 0.5 or less. I think that tends to be a really, really good method, because you're not then having to tamper with the product to remove anything from it. You're just creating something to be what you want it to be. So quite a few of the smaller breweries are doing that. And then when it comes to removing alcohol, there's a few different methods. So you can heat a beer to remove the alcohol, but when you do that in its simplest form, that will damage the flavour, and you'll lose quite a lot with that. It'll generally tend to it'll be quite sweet. Generally not great. You can heat within a vacuum. So when you do that, you reduce the pressure, basically reduces the temperature at which alcohol will burn off. So you're not heating it as high to remove the alcohol. So that's more effective, because you're not going to be reaching those big temperatures and damaging it as much. And you can do reverse osmosis. So science basically have a filter which will allow everything to pass through apart from alcohol, and that's how you'll remove the alcohol. I think that's how Adnams are making theirs. They have quite a helpful little video on that. It might be on their website.
They do, and I've seen their machine in real life, and it is super impressive. And apparently it cost them a small fortune as well.
Yeah.
I think that's worth saying, because one of the other kind of resistances that people sometimes have to buying alcohol-free alternatives is price, because if you're somebody who drinks for the volume of alcohol that you consume, then your price calculation is how much alcohol can I get for the lowest price, right? Yeah. That's often the kind of thought process to go through. And then you come to alcohol-free beers and you go, well, that can't possibly be as useful or valuable as this one, because the alcohol-free beer doesn't have alcohol in, so surely that's where the value in the product is. So can we talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's quite interesting about the manufacturing process and understanding where the value in the drink comes from.
Yeah, I mean, for a lot of these smaller breweries, they're still going to be using really exceptional raw ingredients that cost a lot. And then when you think about the process of removing alcohol, you're adding in an extra process, which obviously is more labor intensive. You're also generally having to invest in really expensive kit. So yeah, I think we always bang on about this, like taking your perception away from value equals percentage, because it's just not the case.
Yeah. Question, Anya, what are you drinking? It looks interesting.
I'm drinking a really lazy Spagliato. So I made a shelf to hide all my nerdy books. So it's Bitter Note, which is a really delicious alcohol-free Amaro. So it's like, this isn't selling it, but it's got quite a medicinal flavour. It's got loads of really amazing botanical flavours in it. And then I've mixed it with alcohol-free fizz. So this one's Bell & Co.
Nice.
I got this from Morrison's. So this one's quite easily available. And then I just put a bit of orange in it. So it's kind of a Spagliato normally would basically be a Negroni, but with fizz instead of gin, I think. Yeah. But I just have shoved together those two things that taste really nice.
Brilliant. That leads us nicely onto a really huge and complex subject. And I have literally no idea how we discuss this in a way which makes any sense to anyone, which is all of the alcohol-free spirits that are available. Because there are masses, right? Absolutely loads. Particularly, I think, last year there was an explosion of gin alternatives, but people are becoming more and more creative in the complex flavors they're going to make intense and put in bottles. So thoughts on those things, because it's quite daunting as well. You know, if you're thinking about, I'm thinking about buying this product, it costs 20 quid, I'm not sure I'm going to like it. Where on earth do you start with all of that? What are your top tips for dealing with that complexity?
I mean, I think the first thing is to think about what you enjoy drinking normally, whether alcoholic or non-alcoholic. Because as Drew says, there's such a range of these things that you can start to narrow them down based on different flavors. So even thinking about, kind of the gin alternatives world, you get a lot which might be more on the traditional end of like a London dry. So, very juniper led and herbal. And then you've also got some, products that are going off the beaten track still within that gin world. So like Colegno, for example, has a very nice tropical flavor. And I'm someone who doesn't really like heavy juniper flavors, but I really enjoy Colegno. I think looking for products which have these kind of additional flavors within them is a really good way of finding a good product, because some botanicals, alcohol-free botanicals, can sometimes struggle to hold up in tonics, and you can kind of end up feeling like you're just drinking a tonic. So looking for products that kind of are very upfront about, the additional botanicals and herbs they put in can often lead you down a more interesting path in finding something that's going to really, you're going to tell you're drinking it, because you don't want to spend, the 20 quid and think, well, could I have just had a tonic in a long glass with some ice,
But also just to say that having tonic in a long glass with some ice and putting a really lovely garnish with it is absolutely an option if you're a gin and tonic fan, because actually lots of people really love the taste of tonic. And as Laura says often, gin is tonic flavouring after all. So that, that the kind of the range of mixers, whether they're tonics or sodas or whatever, is also kind of worth considering if you're the kind of person who likes.
Yeah, and getting funky with your garnishes, like try out like smashing some fresh herbs and whacking that in, get your grapefruits, your orange, your berries, all of that stuff can like really soup up what might feel like quite plain drinks into something that, is going to make you feel exactly like you're having something really fancy. It's a bit like we're talking about the alcohol-free beer thing. When you think about having a nice long drink, whether it's a cocktail, so much of that is the glass, the ice, the garnish, not so much actually what's in your drink. And better than alcohol-free beer on draft, you can actually do that stuff at home.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts on spirits, Anya? Or recommendations, things that you like, or recommendations of things that you like.
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoy like Aperol spritz and things like that. And I think that that's something that can be done really well without the alcohol. So I think the first Amaros that were made were alcohol free anyway. So it was only later that people started making them boozy. So Lyre's, they've just released a new spirit for use in Aperol spritz, but previously I used to enjoy having their Italian orange to do that with. Then you've got companies like Everleaf, who I really like because they're so stringent in sourcing the ingredients that they put into that. So things like that I personally really enjoy.
Worth giving a shout out to Lyre's anyway, because actually they're right. I'm genuinely like a bit wowed. We at Club Soda, we run a mindful drinking festival. We will run a mindful drinking festival again in an age where people can gather again in public places. But we'll find a way of doing them online in the meantime. But Lyre's ran a bar at the mindful drinking festival, and I was a bit blown away by the fact that I went up and they made me an old fashioned, and it tastes like an old fashioned. And that to me seems to be extraordinary, that you can. Some of these drinks, particularly spirits, don't particularly stand up very well on their own as drinks on the rocks, but absolutely in cocktails really hold their own in terms of flavour.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, Lyre's a great example as well of doing some really interesting things with some of the darker spirits, which is, something we've not seen as much before, but now there's some, really exciting products kind of coming onto the market. Ish Spirits do a rum, as do Strike, and both of those guys do use something called capsicum, which is like a little chili, which gives you like that kind of alcohol burn, mimics that at the back of your throat, which can be really nice. And then, Lyre's, they've got a couple of dark rums where they really like build in some of those like kind of vanilla and caramelly flavors you might expect, and an American malt as well. So it's really exciting to see people kind of moving into these more maybe traditionally complex spirits in the alcohol-free world.
Yeah, they even do an absinthe, which you would use in some really niche cocktails, which I think is just very cool that they've just decided to do that.
But part of what Lyre's do and why they have such a range as well is they also talk about using their spirits with cooking for people looking to have alcohol-free alternatives in their cooking. And they do a recipe for absinthe fish, which I've not tried, but I would like to.
Interesting. Fish and green fairies. So there was a couple of questions. One was about, actually, can we go back to the Aperol spritz? Because somebody asked about, I read on the blog, that Aperol can have 0.5% with a dilution. What kind of dilution do you need to get to that level? Okay, let's talk about ways that you can make an Aperol spritz completely alcohol-free.
So we've looked at a few different ways. So you can use something called sand bitters, which I think is like quite a nice alternative. It is quite sweet, but I think it's considered more like a soft drink, but it follows a similar flavor profile. It has that bitterness. Previously, we've used Lyre's Italian orange with like an alcohol-free fizz. I've not tried the new one that they've just released. Have you tried it yet, Jessie?
No.
No, but they've released something that's specifically for making an Aperol. So I don't know if it's just kind of like a pre-mix thing that you would just pour and drink. So yeah.
Brilliant. And then the other question was to me, which was what was the whiskey, the alcohol-free whiskey alternative? And it's the Lyre's American Malt, which they made really fantastic old-fashioned for me. Okay, so we missed out a big category of drinks along the way because we started with red wine, but we didn't talk about white wine and fizz. And that is actually, that feels like of all of the things, of all of the wines, that feels like it's the place which is easiest to find things which are good and drinkable. Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely for fizz. There are a number of great alcohol-free fizzes out there. I personally really like Scavi and Ray. Thompson and Scott do an alcohol-free fizz called Naughty. And I know, Anya, you're quite a fan of some of the more supermarket fizzes. You think they work pretty well?
Yeah, to be honest, like most of them are pleasant in some way. I do think Scavi and Ray is my favourite. But yeah, I tend to just go, so we generally shop at either Morrison's or sometimes we might pop into M&S if we're feeling a bit flash, and just pick up whatever's there. And I've never been like horrified by any of it. It's always been pretty decent. So I think you can generally trust a fizz.
And most supermarkets will do a quite low cost own brand alcohol-free fizz, which is quite nice.
Yeah.
And especially if you're looking to mix it like for stuff like an Aperol.
Yeah, definitely.
Worry less about how those flavours are going to come through.
Yeah. Lindeman's is usually pretty easy to get hold of. Although I couldn't find any today. They have the wines, but no fizz.
Yeah, it's worth saying that and it's something which is really bothering lots of the alcohol-free brands at the moment. And something, if you're watching this webinar and you have a moment, do complain to Tesco's and the rest, is that actually some of the shelf space for alcohol-free drinks has been reduced recently because people are drinking more in lockdown, and the supermarkets are taking alcohol-free product off the shelf and replacing it with alcoholic product because that's the stuff that's really selling right now. I find that a bit depressing.
That's really disappointing.
So do be angry about that appropriately with supermarkets. Okay, so we've talked about beers, wines, and spirits. Can we talk about everything else that you could drink? Start with the idea that it's a replacement for an alcoholic drink, because this is the other thing which I kind of like. So I've always been a beer drinker, and alcohol-free beer has been a real game changer for me. Not just because it's delicious and there's so much available, but because it's a low-calorie alternative, it's very hydrating, isotonic, etc., etc. It's good for you. But there are lots of drinks that you can drink which will kind of satisfy an adult palate, but which don't have alcohol alternatives at all. So tell us about some of those. Where do you want to start? There's so many.
Jessie, do you want to
Yeah, well, I would definitely start with kombuchas because this is something that we're seeing a lot both in supermarkets and in venues, which is really exciting. So, kombucha is basically a fermented tea drink which can be mixed with various things, and it gives you quite a grown-up dry flavour, which has made it very popular as an adult soft drink. It also has supposed health benefits, which can be argued over whether it's true or not, but it's become very popular in as part of that kind of wider health movement that we've seen in society more generally. So you'll be able to find a kombucha in most supermarkets now, and more venues are looking at getting it in, and some places have even started getting it on draft. That's very popular in America as well, having draft kombucha. So I really recommend that. Shrubs, kind of similarly, they're based off apple cider vinegar. Also, both kombuchas and shrubs tend to be a lot more low sugar than traditional soft drinks. So if you are looking for that low sugar option, that can be a good place to go. But yeah, shrubs made with apple cider vinegar, again, makes a very tart, quite complex flavors, which can be good as like more sipping drinks, because sometimes I find with traditional softs, you just end up gulping them down, because often, like compared to when I'm drinking alcohol and you feel like you should savor something, sometimes when there's no alcohol in it, you're just like bloom. But those more complex flavors around kombuchas and shrubs can mean that your drink actually lasts longer, and you're not just like having to double up on drinks and spend much more money.
I think that's really worth saying, actually, for people who are moderating and still wanting to include alcohol in the range of things that you drink. It's worth looking at your alcohol choices as well. If you're somebody who drinks quickly, it's likely that you're choosing drinks which appeal to your sweet tooth in some way. You know, really easily drinking white wines, beers which are on the sweeter and less challenging side. You could actually help yourself by choosing more complex and interesting things to drink, because they'll slow you down and they'll encourage you to slip, and they'll encourage you to notice flavour. So if you are including alcohol, do kind of take a look at kind of the range of stuff that you are drinking there, because you can help yourself a lot by making different choices in what it is that you're drinking. Okay, so we talked a bit about kombuchas and shrubs. What else do we have to choose if we're not in the alcohol category at all?
I've got I bought these at our last festival. So these are Jeffrey's syrups, and I really like them because they have like unusual flavors, so it's not just like buying a cordial. So one of them is lime, gallon orange. This one is yarrow, rosehip and elderflower, and I sometimes like to have these just with tonic and maybe a bit of garnish, and that feels like quite a nice grown-up drink. So yeah, even looking for sort of an interesting cordial that's got something a bit more unique about it. So yeah, I think those work really well.
I've heard there's a great soda company called Cloudwater Soda, who are low sugar and delicious. Anya, could you tell us about them?
I could. I work with them.
That's right. We've already told people on the event listing page, Anya, that you work for Cloudwater Soda. So you should feel free to talk about that.
Never know if I'm allowed to say anything. So basically, Cloudwater is a brewery, but we have started making sodas using ingredients from the brewery. So we infuse them with hops that we would normally put in our beers, which tends to give them a slightly different mouthfeel, make it slightly more resinous, and you get lots of different flavors from different hops. They are low calorie, so I think in some of these we're like less than 5 calories a can. So this one's green tea with Simcoe hops. So we try to sort of take interesting and grown-up flavors, keep it very natural as well. We'll use things like spices as well. So basically, to make a soft drink, like Jessie was saying, you tend to want to just chug stuff. To make something that you would take a little bit more time over and appreciate a bit more. So yeah, that's what we're doing with these.
Brilliant. As you mentioned sugar, somebody asked this question. I think it's a really good one, which is, and I'm just going to put a conversation bookmark in the subject of regular white wine. We will come back to that. Sorry, I missed that out. But low sugar options generally, if you're, so I just want to say, just kind of by way of introduction to this, that actually lots of us, when you cut down or you quit alcohol completely, you will suddenly notice that you have much more of a sweet tooth than you thought you had. And so it is really common to find yourself craving sugar. That's really quite normal and not a thing to worry about. But for people who are concerned about sugar generally and wanting to reduce their sugar consumption, what types of drinks should you be looking at overall, do you think?
I would look at stuff like kombuchas, shrubs, stuff that are going to kind of like naturally be able to have lower sugar. Lots of the alcohol substitutes do end up, boosting these things, often to like kind of improve flavour and things like that. Definitely stay away from stuff like ciders and fruity cider because they're very high sugar, whether they're alcoholic or alcohol free. Looking at stuff like botanicals with a lighter tonic is often a good road to go down if you're looking for a more complex spirit and mixer drink. But basically, the general rules of thumb when it comes to sugar applies to alcohol-free as it does to alcohol. That stuff that you think is going to be really sugary probably is, whether it's boozy or not. And yeah, going for like the lighter tonic options tend to be, the best bet. People are actively trying to remove sugar from their drinks.
Yeah, Anya, any thoughts on that?
I think Jesse's pretty much covered it. Sorry, I just had to come and plug my phone in, so I've just taken you on a small tour of my flat. But no, I think Jesse's pretty much covered it. For me, if I do go through phases where that's something that I worry about, and I tend to stick to things like tonic with some drops of bitters in or something like that, just to sort of jazz it up a bit. But yeah, I think as Jesse says, you can sort of, what you expect is generally the case.
And with all of these things, they can vary so much from brand to brand. So for example, you can get some great low sugar kombuchas, and you can also get kombucha producers who shove them full of sugar as well. So it is really just a case of, finding what works for you, because also what you deem an acceptable level of low sugar can vary from person to person as well. So it's really just being able to look out and find something that you think is going to work.
Yeah. So I'm just going to quickly answer a question which has popped up, which is what are shrubs? So shrubs are vinegar-based fruit drinks. So there's kind of two bits of background to shrubs. One is that two ideas of where they come from. One is that they arose in the Muslim world as an alternative to alcoholic drinks, as a way of adding flavour and complexity to things. And then they actually had a bit of a revival in Prohibition America as an adult drink alternative, basically using vinegar as a way of carrying flavour rather than alcohol as a way of carrying flavour. But there are lots of small batch shrub makers around, and some very good, interesting drinks. And I think they're one of my favourite things. Okay, let's go back to, because I missed it.
Recommendations, Shrub. Sorry, I just saw that pop up.
Sorry, recommendations. Oh yeah, the company Shrub.
I put it in the chat.
Yeah, that's the recommendation, is Shrub. Okay, let's talk about white wine, because we did red wine, we did fizz, but we actually haven't done kind of regular white wine. So any thoughts?
I'm not a massive white wine drinker, so Anya, I don't know if you've had a bit more.
To be honest, can I come back to you in comments on something later, because I had a couple of things over Christmas that I ordered from a French company and I cannot remember what they were called. Can I put that out somewhere for someone later?
We can do that.
The European stuff is interesting though. If you feel like the kind of British or options that are kind of freely available in supermarkets in Britain tend to be stuff like Adnams have a white wine, Lindemans have a white wine, all of which kind of suit certain palates. White wine can kind of be very broad as a thing. Generally, alcohol-free white wines probably aren't going to suit someone who's after a drier flavour. That's why where kombuchas can come in as kind of matching that. But generally, the French alcohol-free whites tend to be a bit better than some of the English ones. So if that's something you're really into, it might be worth going through the maybe little bit of extra effort of ordering online to get some stuff delivered and to try that. So companies like Pierre Chavin, and there's numerous French alcohol-free wine companies.
There's also in Germany, there's a bit of a thing for doing like a grape juice rather than like a wine replica. So they do some really nice Riesling juices, and yeah, again, kind of like natural products that haven't been filtered, that have a little bit more complexity, and those can be quite a nice alternative as well. Even though they're not calling themselves wine, it's a form of grape juice. Those are quite good.
Yeah, and I think the other thing which is worth saying about wine is that, and this is true for alcoholic wine as much as it is for wine which is de-alcoholized or alcohol-free, is that price actually really does matter in terms of the quality. If you're buying a £3.99 or £2.99 wine, you shouldn't expect it to taste like a £20 bottle of wine. And that's as true if it's alcohol-free as if it's got alcohol in. So it is worth. I don't want to come across as a wine snob, because I'm really not. And a lot of the price of a bottle of wine is the bottle, not the insides of it. But generally, if people kind of put up with terrible white wine, because it gets you drunk. But if being drunk isn't what you're in the game for, then you're going to want a better quality white wine, which means you're going to end up spending more. That's just the nature of the thing. Okay, so we've been talking about alcohol-free drinks for an hour almost. It's been 50 minutes, which is, I think, evidence of how passionate we are about this subject in Club Soda, but also just how much choice there is. And the thing that we haven't talked about, amazingly, is the Club Soda Guide, which is an amazing resource for people. And I wonder if you guys could tell us a bit about it and how people could use it.
Yeah, absolutely. So for all of this kind of stuff, all your recommendations, the guide really is the place to go. We have over 1,000 different low no alcohol drinks listed there, covering all the topics we talked about today. I'll put the URL in the chat, but basically it's really easy to just go through and search. You can shorten your options by category, so you can search for a wine and then turn it into whites, and we have pretty much everything that's out there is listed. You can click through on those drinks. We'll put, if you can get them in supermarkets, where you can find them online to allow you to order them, and basically it just is the best way to find out about new drinks and find new things to try if you're looking for recommendations. The other half of the guide is not so useful at this moment in time. We also have over 3,000 different pubs, bars and restaurants across the UK, which are scored based on how many low no alcohol drinks they've got, and it also lists the drinks they've got. Sadly, it's not so useful right now because they're all closed. But in the near future, when hopefully things start to return to something a bit more like normalcy, if you're going out, you can search by your location, and the guide will hopefully throw up some places near you which are going to have some better alcohol-free options than maybe just walking into a random place which will help you really plan your night and stick to your goals.
That's brilliant.
Oh, that chimed in like it was the end of your
Yeah, sorry, there's a notification on my laptop. So I guess the other thing which is worth saying about the guide, and you mentioned about venues, and the hospitality industry is having a really tough time at the moment. We know lots of our friends and colleagues, partners who are sitting around in furlough. But one of the things that the guide does is that it for venues, it encourages them to think more about their offer for people who aren't drinking alcohol, and that's in normal times that's a really important part of Club Soda's approach, is that we think that going out and having a good time is a really important thing for your well-being, and you should do it and go out and find good places to go and enjoy alcohol-free drinks in them. Brilliant. So clubsodaguide.com, as Jesse mentioned. There's a link as well in the chat here on the recording. There's a link in the page just down below to the Club Soda Guide. Guys, any final thoughts on this kind of extraordinary world of alcohol-free drinks and choices and how best to navigate it?
I think whenever you are trying something new, don't put expectations on it to be the same as something you've had before. I think I now approach every drink just with an open mind and just ask myself if I enjoy it as a beverage, and I don't expect things to be the same as the best beer I ever tasted or the most lovely champagne I ever tried. I just try things and ask myself if I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I totally echo what Anya said. Trying stuff with an open mind is amazing, and also trying stuff. There is such a boom in low no alcohol drinks at the moment. There are new things coming onto the market constantly. So just getting out there, looking online, looking in the supermarket, finding new things to try is the best way to find the stuff that's going to suit your taste ultimately, because as much as we want to be able to point you in the right direction, your taste is going to be your own. So just try as much as you can, and you'll definitely find something that's going to suit your taste buds.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I guess that's the other thing. Sorry, that's the other thing I was going to say is to expect that your taste will change over time as well. If you go for any period of time alcohol free or significantly cutting down your drinking, you'll become much more attuned to sweet flavors than you ever were before, because just happened. So you'll want to look for other options which aren't quite as sweet as they were, and you can expect your changes to your taste to develop and change, and that's a good thing, because it's good to experiment and try things out.
Yeah. And one last thing, I think it's really important not to judge an entire category by one drinking experience. If you have a botanical and you didn't enjoy it, that doesn't mean that you're not going to enjoy other ones. So like, keep trying different things. Don't judge it all on one product.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Anya and Jessie, for your time this evening. Really, really appreciate it. We're going to wrap this up. We'll put the recording online so people can come back and review it. And just a reminder, if you're looking for an amazing low and low alcohol drink, go to clubsodaguide.com and you will find over 1,000 drinks listed there. Just by way of heads up about what's happening tomorrow, in the Sober Weekender. We're kicking off the day with breakfast in bed with me and Laura at 9 o'clock in the morning. We're talking about happiness and the pursuit of pleasure. And then we've got a session 2 o'clock in the afternoon where we're talking about ways that you can support your well-being. We're doing that with Katie Elliott from Little Challenges. And in the evening, we've got a panel discussion on the upsides of changing your drinking. So it's a pretty packed day of stuff tomorrow. Oh, and there's an exclusive podcast preview to listen to as well. So there is, if you're doing the Sober Weekender this weekend and you thought you were going to have a lazy Sunday, other things going. We've got a lot happening. Guys, thank you so much for your time. Enjoy. What are you doing for the rest of your weekend? What's going on for you?
Sean's cooking a duck.
Nice.
I'll be lazing around on the sofa.
Excellent. Good. Well, whatever you're doing, and for you guys watching as well, thanks so much for joining us, and we will see you tomorrow.